Virtually a paradise on earth. That is what tourist literature said about Sri Lanka. The beautiful island of beaches and hill resorts. Sri Lanka, with many a monument of peace, inspired by the message of the Buddha. Paradise it was till 1983, when fumes of long-suppressed ethnic passions inflamed, and hell broke out. After 4 years of agony, a new chapter of history for the island nation was ushered in on the 29th of July, 1987, when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi of India and President Junius Jayawardena of Sri Lanka signed an agreement assigning a peacekeeping role for India in the troubled neighbor state. The Buddha is said to have attained enlightenment under this Bodhi tree in Bihar, India. Over 2,000 years ago, a branch of this tree was taken to Sri Lanka, where today it not only symbolizes the Buddha's message of peace to all mankind, but also stands as a living testimony to this age-old relationship between India and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka developed as a great center of Buddhist thought and culture. In ancient times, the Palas of eastern India migrated to Sri Lanka and are considered to be ancestors of the present Sinhalese population of Sri Lanka. Also, the Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas of South India migrated to Sri Lanka several centuries ago. Today they are the Tamils of Sri Lanka, who share a common language with the people of Tamil Nadu in South India. Almost all the peoples of Sri Lanka are ethnically derived from or related to communities from different regions of India. Sri Lanka became an independent nation in 1948. The island has 3 ethnic groups, subdivided by 4 religious groups. The ethnic groups are Sinhalese, Tamils, and Burghers. The Burghers are Eurasians. The Tamils come from southern India, most of whom have settled in Sri Lanka for over 4 centuries. Particularly, the northern and eastern provinces of the island are Tamil-speaking. There are also tea plantation workers of Tamil origin in the central hill districts of southern Sri Lanka. In terms of religion, the Tamils are predominantly Hindu, but there are a large minority of Muslims and Christians. The Sinhalese are predominantly Buddhist, but there is a Christian minority. The Eurasians are generally Christian. It is an unfortunate historic fact that while the Tamils and Sinhalese have lived in harmony for centuries, the Tamils have felt that they have been increasingly discriminated against and have been denied their due share and say in the country's national life in the last 4 decades since independence. The Tamil grievances included lack of equal opportunity in education, discriminatory recruitment policies, leading, among other things, to gross underrepresentation in the police, army, and other government services, as well as non-fulfillment of provisions in the country's constitution relating to the status and use of the Tamil language. Another major factor of conflict has been the government's policy of colonization of the traditional Tamil areas of the north and east with Sinhalese population. This has been looked upon as a deliberate attempt to erode the majority status of the Tamils in these areas. In the general elections of 1977, the Tamil United Liberation Front, TULF for short, contesting on the platform of seeking a restoration of the legitimate rights and opportunities of the Tamils, won a majority of seats from the northern and eastern districts and became the main opposition party in Sri Lanka's parliament. Democratic means having failed to secure the Tamils their rights, a movement started in the 1970s for an independent homeland for them, Elam. Although this objective was common, different militant groups began to function from northern Sri Lanka with a somewhat mutually competitive spirit.
Finally realizing that we have to defend ourselves against the escalating state terrorism, we were forced to take up arms to defend ourselves.
The Tamils have made every possible attempt to live together with the Sinhalese people in one political framework and enjoy equal rights and live with honor and dignity. Every such attempt failed, and the Sinhalese had inflicted pogrom after pogrom on the Tamil people whenever they wanted their rights. The worst carnage was in July-August 1983, when more than 3,000 people were killed.
And that became a watershed in the contemporary history of Sri Lanka. Following the killing of a few Sri Lankan soldiers in the Jaffna Peninsula, communal violence erupted in Colombo city, resulting in the destruction of Tamil property and killing of Tamils in Colombo on an unprecedented scale. Regretting the role of the Sri Lankan armed forces during these riots, President Jayawardena of Sri Lanka said,
when a curfew is enacted and security forces enforce us strongly, no violation lasts more than 2 days the most. In our case, the curfew was not enforced strictly. I think there was a big anti-Tamil feeling among the forces also. And they felt that shooting the Sinhalese who were rioting would be anti-Sinhalese. And actually in some places we saw them encouraging.
The impact of July 1983 was terrible. About 30,000 Tamil refugees of Sri Lanka arrived in Tamil Nadu on the east coast of South India. The influx continued, and the numbers soared high as the problem escalated.
The
Sri Lankan army threatened to burn up our house and shoot us down. We had just settled my daughter's wedding. They shot and killed the bridegroom. We have both landed here, searching for the children whom we sent earlier. Apart from the huge influx of refugees to India, some Sri Lankan Tamils began to take refuge in various countries around the world. However, the largest number of persecuted Sri Lankan Tamils took refuge in India. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, said,
we have 30,000 refugees, which creates a problem for us. We would like them all to go back, but our problem is that when they say that if you push us back, we will be killed, then it becomes a little difficult for us to push them back. This is why we are making such a tremendous effort to see that there are some negotiations and that this ethnic problem is solved by the Sri Lankan people themselves.
Meanwhile, the militant Tamil groups were consolidating their position in the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka, getting prepared to face the Sri Lankan army if the state chose to find only a military solution to the ethnic problem. While the concern in India grew at the killings in Sri Lanka and the influx of refugees, President Jayawardena sought India's good offices to find an early and peaceful political solution to the ethnic crisis. A formula was to be evolved to maintain the unity of Sri Lanka as one nation by a suitable agreement maintaining Sri Lanka's existence as a multilingual, multi-religious society under one government. Following discussions with the government of India, an all-party conference was convened in Sri Lanka in the autumn of 1984. With Sinhalese apprehensions about ulterior Tamil separatist motive and Tamil memories of ethnic partiality, the talks broke down and the conference failed. By April 1985, the militants as well as the Sri Lankan government returned to armed conflict with inhuman consequences. In the ancient town of Anuradhapura, 150 Sinhalese civilians were mercilessly massacred by the Tamil militants. The Sri Lankan government woke up to this rude shock that the militants were active not only in the northern Tamil areas, but also in the Sinhala strongholds in the south. At the initiative of the Sri Lankan government, talks were revived with India, and there were a series of meetings in which India's diplomatic efforts were directed at maintaining the unity of Sri Lanka and yet finding an honorable solution to the Tamils' problem. In particular, at Thimphu in Bhutan, although all the groups participated in the talks, it resulted in a stalemate with each side remaining inflexible. The scale and content of violence, both from the militants and the Sri Lankan armed forces, increased dramatically. The Sri Lankan state got more militarized than ever before, imported arms, invited foreign military advisors and mercenary groups, resulting in an ascending scale of violence. Some of the Tamil militant forces, divided although among themselves, got hold of effective control of Jaffna, the headquarters of the northern peninsula, as well as several other Tamil dominant regions. A de facto parallel administration began to function in these regions under the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. Even as India was attempting to use its good offices to bring back normalcy by the visit of a delegation of Indian leaders to Colombo during April-May 1986, an Air Lanka aircraft was destroyed by a bomb at Colombo's Katunayaka airport. While the Sri Lankan government claimed that the bombing was to avert Tamil militants, the militants themselves claimed that it was the act of certain agencies determined to discredit them. The Sri Lankan armed forces began to retaliate. Tamil areas in the northern and eastern provinces came under siege, with thousands of innocent civilians perishing in the face of relentless and indiscriminate attack, both from the air and on the ground by Sri Lankan armed forces. These attacks destroyed many civilian targets, including schools and hospitals. The pressure of refugees landing in India mounted, and by 1986, there were over 136,000 Tamils of Sri Lanka who had taken refuge in India. At the SAARC conference in Bangalore in India in November 1986, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and President Jayawardena spent a great deal of time to attempt an agreement acceptable to all. While this also produced no immediate result, a set of proposals were arrived at, leading to eventual success in finding a solution. In December 1986, the government of India held a further series of parleys with representatives of the Sri Lankan government as well as the various Tamil groups of Sri Lanka. A set of proposals were arrived at which sought to meet the legitimate aspirations and redress the genuine grievances of the Tamils within the framework of the unity and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. However, these parleys did not pay immediate dividends. Both sides returned to increasing violence. The Sri Lankan government escalated their military operations by land, sea and air. Aerial attacks were mounted regularly, resulting in many civilian casualties. The Tamil militants, on their part, had mustered sufficient strength to attack government installations. The telecommunication center at Jaffna is one example of a Sri Lankan installation reduced to rubble. The government of Sri Lanka took the extreme step of imposing an economic blockade on Jaffna Peninsula. No fuel or food was allowed to cross into Jaffna area. With these extreme developments and the influx of further refugees arriving in India, India could no longer remain a passive spectator. On the 28th of May 1987, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi appealed to the Sri Lankan government to stop this economic blockade and offered to send a mission of mercy with relief supplies of food and essential drugs to the Tamil areas of Sri Lanka. As reports of the desperate state of the people of Jaffna reached India, public concern mounted. As a humanitarian gesture, India sent a convoy of unarmed and unescorted boats containing relief supplies to the beleaguered people of Jaffna. The Sri Lankan Navy intercepted the boats and refused permission for them to enter Sri Lankan waters. The boats returned disappointed. Deeply moved by the humanitarian considerations for the suffering people of northern Sri Lanka, India decided to take the dramatic operation of airdropping relief supplies of food and medicines in the Tamil areas. The Tamils of Sri Lanka received these supplies not merely in terms of their dire need, but with a sense of jubilation.
And the first silver lining was the dropping of food parcels by India, which came as an oasis. People looked to it as mercy dropping from heaven.
Although the relief operation was criticized in some quarters, by and large, sensitive opinion supported the Indian action as a genuinely moral act of courage. Even while the airdropping of supplies was taking place, the governments of India and Sri Lanka were engaged in diplomatic consultations. An agreement was soon reached between the two governments for reaching the food supplies and medicines to the people of Jaffna from India. With the cooperation of the Sri Lankan government, shiploads of urgent food and other supplies were transported from Madras to Sri Lankan ports.
And as these ships full of relief goods came to Jaffna, the economic blockade was lifted. The Sri Lankan government itself sent some 900 tons of food. The presence of our Red Cross and the arrival of the relief goods immediately neutralized the military operations, and there was a very tenuous peace in the peninsula. Utilizing this opportunity, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi thought that it is time again to approach the government of Sri Lanka to ask whether, after having gone through this entire trauma of violence, they would now like to resume the process of meaningful discussions. President Jayawardene boldly moved forward to solve the problem by making offers which met the basic aspirations of his Tamil citizens. The important thing about the draft given was that it recognized the ethnic identity of all the communities which constitute the Sri Lankan nation. It ensured that, rather offered that the ethnic identity of each one of these communities should be strengthened and nurtured. It acknowledged that the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka were the historical areas of habitation of the Tamil-speaking peoples of Sri Lanka. It provided or offered that Tamil shall be a full-fledged official language of Sri Lanka. And the most important thing, it said that the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka would be reconstituted into one administrative unit, thus meeting the desire for linkage which the Tamils had been negotiating for. But at the same time, the president had to take care of Sinhalese public opinion and the apprehensions of the Muslim population in the eastern province. And therefore, in the agreement, he has suggested that after 1 year, there should be a referendum in the eastern province so that the people in the eastern province can decide whether they wish to remain linked with the north in one administrative unit. Prime Minister Sri Rajiv Gandhi spent the 9 days more or less continuously on looking at this agreement, studying it, improving upon it. And those 9 days were spent in a very intense exercise to polish up these proposals, to garner acceptance from it from all concerned Tamil groups, and to see that it is approved of in a manner where it also does not exacerbate Sinhalese apprehensions about the implications of the agreement.
Certain extremist elements in Sri Lanka, however, attempted through protests, violence and intimidation to undermine the quest for peace and good neighborliness undertaken by the governments of India and Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi arrived in the curfew-clamped Sri Lankan capital. With a combination of exceptional courage, statesmanship and mutual understanding, President Jayawardena and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi signed the historic Indo-Sri Lanka Agreement at Colombo on the 29th of July 1987 to end the prolonged ethnic crisis. The two leaders also exchanged letters along with the agreement to take care of the security and political concerns of both the countries. The two leaders agreed to ensure that no hostile forces were allowed to come into the region.
All the people who are making money on arms contracts, they won't like this. There are certain hardcore racist elements on both sides of the communal divide. They won't like this. And there are others who, in one way or another, were making money out of this question. They won't like it.
Yes, there were some people who did not like the Indo-Sri Lanka Agreement. The whole world was indeed shocked by the attempt on the life of the Prime Minister of India before his departure from Colombo. Immediately after this incident, on the return journey in the aircraft, the Prime Minister of India was asked
that this incident would create any problem between India and Sri Lanka. This kind of any impact.
It will have no problem between President Jayawardena, our agreement, Sri Lanka and India.
I express my regret also to Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, to Mrs. Gandhi, their children, to the government of India and the people of India for the insult that was offered to him today in the morning. He was a guest of the state, a guest of our people, and we have always through the centuries been known for the hospitality and the kindness with which we treat our guests. Why was this the occasion for incident that occurred? Why is there violence throughout the country? The idea, I understand, is to prevent the signing of an accord of peace and understanding to return normalcy to the north and the east. The accord has been signed. The efforts have not succeeded. Why they should kill each other? Why they should kill the people of the southern provinces? If they are hoping, as they have become singular terrorists, and northern terrorists have given up their terrorism, I appeal to them to give up their terrorism in this part. Instead of damaging the Sinhalese people more, we will see that southern terrorism is wiped out of this land.
Responding to a request from President Jayawardena, Indian peacekeeping forces arrived in Jaffna and the eastern provinces immediately on signing the agreement. The leader of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, Mr. Prabhakaran, announced in a massive public meeting, "This is a dramatic turn of events which is beyond our control. The Prime Minister of India has assured us of security for the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. Although our confidence is not yet restored in the Colombo regime, because of our faith in India's role to safeguard our interest, we have decided to surrender our arms to the Indian peacekeeping force."
பிரதமரின் நேர்மையில் எனக்கு நம்பிக்கை இருக்கின்றது. அவரது உறுதிமொழிகளில் நம்பிக்கை இருக்கின்றது. சிங்கள இனவாத அரசு மீண்டும் தமிழர் இன ஒழிப்பு நடவடிக்கையில் இறங்க இந்தியா அனுமதிக்காது என நாம் நம்புகிறோம். இந்த நம்பிக்கையில் தான் நாம் இந்திய சமாதான படையிடம் ஆயுதங்களை ஒப்படைக்க முடிவு செய்தோம்.
All arms presently held by the militants in accordance with an agreed procedure will be handed over to the designated representatives of the government of Sri Lanka.
50% of the arms have been surrendered. Certainly about 90% of the heavy arms which are necessary for the launching of a separatist war have been handed over. The other steps envisage the returning back of a war-ravaged segment of Sri Lankan community into the democratic process.
We are able to move about freely without any fear of shells or air attacks, and we are able to go about our normal life. With the presence of the peacekeeping forces from India, the quiet is being established all right.
As we all know, India has taken a major role in this. It has been India's initiative, and I am very hopeful that India, which has been able to bring to an end phase 1 of the struggle, will take us on to phase 2 of the peace accord.
Having successfully stopped hostilities between ethnic groups, there has been disturbing news of intergroup violence among different Tamil militant groups.
Our role, as far as peacekeeping was concerned, was to maintain the peace between the Sri Lankan armed forces on the one hand and the militants on the other. And it was not envisaged that we would intervene in a situation where the militant groups clashed with each other. That was and still remains a police responsibility. And what we are doing now is that we are getting the police to more actively get involved in the process of peacekeeping, and wherever the police needs strengthening or bolstering up, we are providing them the wherewithal to do the needful.
Even as India has been keeping vigil to ensure enduring peace in the northern parts of the troubled island state, tragically, Sinhala terrorists have been active in the southern parts. Right at the Parliament House in Colombo, a heinous attempt was made on the lives of the Sri Lankan president and his cabinet colleagues, resulting in the death of a district minister and grievous injury to some other ministers and members of parliament.
But the terrorists living in the south are continuing their activities. We shall carry on our work to see that they do not succeed, and I seek the aid of all those who are interested in the freedom, the democracy, the integrity, and the unity of our country to join hands with the government and others who oppose these sinister methods. We intend to carry on our work irrespective of the evil forces that are ganging up against us.
Immediately after signing the agreement, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi had said,
It also removes opportunities for hostile forces to destabilize the region. Apart from the agreement which looks towards the Tamils' interest in Sri Lanka, we also had an exchange of letters between President Jayawardene and myself. And it is in these exchange of letters that we have seen to the security problems in our region. With this exchange of letters, we will see that such hostile forces are not allowed to come into our region.
The 23rd of August, 1987, marked an emotionally gratifying event for the Tamils of Sri Lanka. The chariot festival of the Nallur Krishnaswamy temple in Jaffna, celebrated with a combination of gaiety and religious fervor, attracted hundreds of thousands of people who had missed the annual festival for over 4 years. Indeed, it was thanksgiving to God for the Indo-Sri Lanka agreement and intense prayer for its continued success in bringing peace to the island.